excited to hear what you got to say.
Cool. All right, so like Zane said, I'm Mariah. I'm a creative technologies major with a minor in chemistry. I'm going to get us kicked off with telling you a little bit about myself and my experience in the program over the past few years. Oh, we're still on the Zoom tab. Okay. So I came into Berry as a CRT and chemistry double major. So my first year was spent largely fulfilling gen ed requirements and doing chemistry. And I think I maybe walked in the lab once or twice with my BCC class, but that was about it. So I finally came and took 101 in the fall of my sophomore year. And I think that most people will attest that I have not, in fact, left the lab since. So even though I was extremely reserved and shy at the time, and I probably spoke to all of two people, the lab was still where I felt the most comfortable. I was hired as a lab assistant and gradually started kind of coming out of my shell and started making some really, really cool friends. I never could have guessed what the next few years would have in store for me. I first bonded with some people that would become some pretty good friends over a bucket of slime that turned your hands dark blue. I never would have guessed when I met him that Paul can seriously rock some thigh highs. And I never would have expected that I would choose to stay on campus over the summer. But that would probably become the most influential decision that I would make. And not just because I realized that the sides of my head should have always been shaved. But as I stayed over the summer, I was introduced to some things that I didn't even know existed. And not only that, but I realized that I was capable of doing those things, as well as some possibly questionably intelligent things, such as this picture in the top right of me dragging the RGB behind the paddy wagon. So that leads me into my first contact with PCB design. So Zane introduced a challenge to Graham and I, and Emily and Patrick as well over this summer. He had this idea of these 1-inch by 1-inch circuit boards, and he wanted us to come up with some concepts. And I was terrified because I had never done this before. I had taken 101, and that was pretty much the extent of my knowledge. Luckily, Graham was there to give me some pointers and kind of help me along the way because I was panicking. But I became quickly enamored with this concept, and it was really fascinating to me, so much so that I actually went home at one point over the summer to visit my parents and ended up spending several hours at a Dunkin' Donuts attempting, being the operative word, to design a PCB on my own because it was just really cool to me and I was just immediately fascinated by it. So as I started to kind of get more comfortable with this, I was wanting to push it further. Like, how can I change this and make this even more like interesting and engaging? So that leads me into kind of the theme of my work here, which is pushing the boundaries of expression through PCB design. And what I mean by that is, do PCBs have to be square? You know, the stuff that we had been designing over the summer was as square can get. It was 1-inch by 1-inch. And I wanted to challenge this notion that they had to be that way. I kind of looked at PCBs the way that like a painter would look at paint or a sculptor would look at clay. It was a medium for me to kind of express these ideas that I was having. And I think that really came into fruition when I took the advanced prototyping class and I first made the pop art PCB for this class, which is probably my favorite project, definitely out of that class, maybe overall, but it was so much fun to kind of have this freedom to explore these ideas that I was having. And I learned something about myself during this project. I'm really good at cramming 5 minutes into 2 hours. And that may sound like a bad thing, and I think in some circumstances it is. But with this, it was an opportunity for me to, like I said, just push those boundaries. And I think there was actually a limit to the number of neopixels you could have on your board for this assignment. I think it was around 20. I have 51. So I spent just hours and hours iterating on how I could make this Pac-Man Ghost like just covered in lights and have all of the traces work, have things where I wanted them, and just make it aesthetically pleasing. And so I had the freedom to do that with this project, which is why it's like one of my favorite things, just really like open exploration. And so this is this is the PCB view of this. All of the red like little squares and all of the red lines and things are traces that had to be connected. In some instances, like you can see on the photo on the right-hand side, there's just some straight lines that come all the way down from the top. I actually had to take a trace from the top layer and put it on the bottom just to get it to connect where it needed to, because there was just so much going on. In the bottom right is the hodgepodge of traces that I had to do to get the surface mount at Tiny to program with the way that we were doing it at the time. I really wanted those things in the feet of the ghost because I didn't want it to take away from any of the lights that were on like the main body. I wanted that to be its own thing. So that took a lot of reworking and reframing my view, flipping things around, which was crazy. So I had to delete traces and redo them. But I could not be more happy with how this ghost turned out. So I actually didn't grow up going to arcades or anything, but my dentist's office had a Pac-Man machine. So in programming this, I really wanted to do justice to the game. So I made it after the blue ghost. It has an animation where it's just kind of this sparkly light blue color, and you push the button and it starts to have this one yellow neopixel that goes around and eats all of the white neopixels, like Pac-Man eating the Pac dots. And at the end, it starts to flash the dark blue and light blue, or dark blue and white, that the ghosts flash like when the orb is like wearing off. So I really wanted to not only capture the essence of the ghost in the form, but as well in the code as well. So this was just an extremely fun project. But even after this, I was like, how can I push this further? What else can I do? And so that kind of leads me into the project for the study abroad that we took to Norway. The initial concept with this actually came while I was like watching a movie on the Foof one night, I think maybe during a Slackathon or something. And I was noticing that as my eyes kind of whipped back and forth across the projector, that I was seeing like these red, green, and blue semicircles and just sort of the breakdown of light. And since we had learned that in 101 with the Rainbow Fruit Lab, I was like so cool. So that middle top image is sort of what I mean by breakdown of light. So you have the three primary colors, and as they sort of overlap and interact with one another, they create the secondary and white. And so I wanted to do something that would capture this. And so for the hackathon, I created just this really simple foam core like prototype that uses persistence of vision to show the breakdown of the primary colors. So I programmed it to rapidly flash red, green, and blue, so that to your naked eye, you can't actually see anything other than white because it's just moving so rapidly. But as soon as you move it in space, you can see the breakdown as it sort of like flashes these colors. And in wanting to take that to Norway and use it for, teaching children, I wanted this to have an inherently fun design to it, where kids kind of can look at it and almost know what to do to get it to show them what I was trying to teach them. So I designed it. I call it the pinwheel, the RGB pinwheel. At the time, fidget spinners were a little bit more common knowledge. So I was like, I really want to make this something that you can look at and you just kind of want to spin it. And so there are a lot of challenges with this, most of them revolving around the center hole size, because originally I had a bearing in the center that you could spin. Keeping that in the board itself became a challenge, and I realized when we went to Norway that it was actually a little bit too big for children's hands. Apparently, fourth graders don't have freakishly long fingers like I do. But even so, they managed to figure out even like grabbing it and just shaking it rapidly or putting it on their desk and spinning it. They figured out and wanted to explore with it enough that the concept was still there. And I think one of the most rewarding things was at the end, a little boy named Noah came up to me, and English is their second language, so it was a little bit broken, but he looked at me and he's like, "It's like fidget spinner, very good." And I was like, "Thanks, man." So that was really cool because it was just kind of this very rewarding moment to have had a concept and have had something that I wanted to convey through this design and have that actually be a thing that was received without me having to kind of initiate it. So like the design itself kind of sparked that, oh, this is like a fidget spinner, this is like a toy, which was really, really cool. So then after that, I was like, man, how can I just do PCB design for all of my classes? Like, this is all I want to do. So how can I maneuver through my classes to make it so that I can do this again? Which leads me into the Viking head keychains. So this was the project for the entrepreneurship class where we had to make a business and sell something. So this was an idea that I tossed around with Zane that first summer that I stayed, where we could create, you know, this replica of the Viking head as something that's like school spirit oriented, to sell to Berry students and alumni, faculty, staff, and all of that. And when entrepreneurship, the class kind of came around, I was like, yes, this is my moment. I can do this now. And so there were some challenges with this. Rachel Bibby and Olivia Logan and I were all in a group. And in designing this, we tossed around some ideas of like, well, if we do, you know, the LEDs all horizontal, is it going to look right? If we turn them to go around the curve of the board as the pick and place, going to be able to place them. There are a lot of things we had to take into consideration, and we initially wanted to, so we decided we wanted to panelize them, because that basically just means they come in this center photo all kind of connected. And so we could put this panel on the pick and place, and it would be able to put the components on 4 boards at a time rather than just the one, as well as we didn't have to make sort of a platform for it to hold on to it. Since it's got this rounded shape, the pick and place wouldn't be able to grab it. And we ran into an issue with that. We initially wanted to V-score them, which is a really nice, clean cut, but instead, since it has these rounded edges, it had to be tabbed instead, which was something that we had to take into consideration with this, because with the tabs, you can kind of see in this left image here at the bottom, there's this sort of like serrated looking edge. That was a lot worse when we had broke the boards apart. So we had to actually file those down to make it flush. But we kind of decided that the time that it would take to place components on individual boards would be so much more than just filing the edges down a little bit. So we decided to go ahead with the tabs, and the pick and place was a godsend during all of this, because we ended up making 500 boards. We did do well on Mountain Day and sort of at the football games a little bit. We ended up making around $600 in profit, which was really, really cool. So after I kind of made circuit boards for, you know, for classes, I was kind of like, you know, I really just want to do something with this just on my own. And I had this idea kind of floating around in my head of wanting to make something that was 3-dimensional. And I woke up from a nap and was like, I got it. And immediately just sort of went on to my laptop and started designing this. This is the HackBerry Lab Lamp. It is 4 PCBs. There's 3 designs total. 2 of the walls are the exact same, and the front and back panel are a little bit different. And so this is my baby. I love this. It was just so exciting to have this concept and actually have it come together and work out. So it does have a piece of black acrylic on the top, which gives it this kind of cool mirrored effect when you look at it from the bottom. But you can kind of see that there's just a ton of LEDs. I think there's around 85 LEDs in it. So that was fun. It was a lot of time, but it was so cool. And the front facing panel of, and I'll switch to the next slide so you can see it a little bit better. The front facing panel of the one that has the bored out holes, I actually left exposed traces so that it would have the connecting pieces of the logo in it. And to get this to become 3-dimensional, what I did was I left exposed areas on the edges of each of the boards. So these not only are for functionality in terms of like the top one is transmitting ground between each of the panels, the middle is doing power, and the last one is doing data, so that all the panels can communicate with one another. But it's actually allowing the box to have structure on its own. And I'll have to move this because I can't actually see this, but this red circle here is one of the solder joints. And so what I did was I just caked solder on the exposed layers first and then kind of held it up and just pressed the iron into it and let it take hold, and gradually just kind of continued to heat them up until they were lined up how I wanted them. And when I hooked it up to the computer and actually programmed it for the first time, and all of it lit up onto the next panel, I just started like screaming and running around. It was awesome. It was so cool. So I love this project. I was very excited that it worked, and I was just kind of one of those things where I was like, having an idea and seeing it come to fruition was just extremely rewarding. So kind of wanting to push myself in a completely different direction. My capstone project, my capstone project was something that I was not as comfortable with. I had originally was like, oh yeah, I'll just do PCB design for capstone. I'll be like, I'm good at that. I can do that. And that's something I should just go ahead and do. But I had this idea, and it was not something I was comfortable doing, but it was kind of one of those ideas where it's like, I'll figure it out because I want this to be a thing. So for my capstone, what I wanted to do was kind of incorporate my minor into creative tech as well. So I wanted to do something related to chemistry. So I talked to a couple of professors around campus and asked them, what do general education students struggle with in chemistry classes? And a lot of them said isomers. So what an isomer is it's a compound that shares the same molecular formula, but it's arranged differently. So on this left-hand side, you can see that from the top structure, the blue and red circles switch places down to this bottom one. And that fundamentally changes what the molecule does. So theobromine is found in chocolate. Theophylline is a drug used to treat asthma. So it's a really fascinating concept. And I kind of had this idea, what if I could make this into a video game? What if I could make this like Guitar Hero? I love Guitar Hero. So I developed ISO Hero, which is a rendition of Guitar Hero that teaches you about isomers. And so doing this, I found myself a Guitar Hero guitar. Thank you, Corey. He donated it. He didn't donate it, I bought it. But I took it apart and soldered some wires into it and just kind of bypassed all of the circuitry, because really all I needed were these buttons up here. Zane helped me get it plugged into a Teetsy and get it talking to a computer, so it was typing numbers. So that was what we used in the code to get the guitar to communicate with the computer and kind of be like, hey, when I press 8, that means the green button's been pressed. And so going into that, the gameplay, you go in, there's 3 levels. There's an easy, a medium, and a hard. They go up in difficulty in terms of speed, but they also go up in difficulty in terms of the number of different structures that you can have for a given formula. There's a loading screen, doesn't actually load, but it does tell you a fun fact. Sometimes it's a joke. I'm a nerd, but anyway, what happens is these structures start to fly into the base molecule. So in this case, it's oxygen, and the structure that's flying in is a methane. So what happens is, as it approaches the oxygen, you have these 3 colors available to choose from. One of them is the correct place to put it. So when you press that button on the guitar, it will snap into that place and generate a new random color placement and allow you to place the next structure. So there it was placed there. The next one will be yellow, and the hydrogen that comes in from the, sorry, I'm gesturing with my hands, from the bottom of the screen will be placed on the right-hand side, and it moves on to the next isomer. And so there's 3 different levels. If you get it wrong, it kicks you back and you have to try again. Ooh, sorry, I lost my train of thought. as the level difficulty increases, the number of buttons that you can choose from also increases. And the final level uses all 5 buttons, so you have to really be quick because they fly in very fast. But this was one of those things